my little pup can get them. So he will do that. A year and a
Well,
half.
yep. Our stream is going. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we are talking about 1980s action movie dudes. We watched specifically Predator, Bloodsport, Above the Law, and Rambo: First Blood Part Two to get representative films from four of the big 80s action movie dudes. But all of this theme was inspired by you not watching a movie but reading a book.
Yes, I read a book called The Last Action Heroes:
Ooh.
The Triumphs, Flops, and Feuds of Hollywood's Kings of Carnage, from Nick DeSimlin. So it's a very good book, especially if you like these kind of movies and kind of grew up reading that, watching these. I think when I summarized the book, I figured I'd kind of talk a little bit about what's in the book, why we chose this. My goal, though, I mean, you can see it's a pretty thick book. Like I can't recount every story from the book as we talk, so
Oh,
I
sure.
I try to cover like the concept, and then when we're talking about the movies, if there's something that's relevant from the book that kind of like gives context, I'll try to just give that context as opposed to saying the book said, the book said, the book said. Like I'll speak it, and people can know that I'm giving credit ahead of time if that knowledge came from Nick DeSimlin.
Sounds good.
All right. Um, so it's basically a biography style book about action movie stars, particularly in the 80s. It does kind of go into the transition into the 90s and even to kind of the modern day.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you hear him howling?
No, not really.
Okay, good. It's he's howling loud, but downstairs. Um, so I think when I first kind of pitched this to you, I used sort of a crux of what the book is talking about,
Mm-hmm.
used as a kind of a pivot point. But the book is not as simplistic as that. So it kind of comes to this crescendo using the fact that Last Action Hero and Jurassic Park opened on the same weekend,
Mm.
and that Jurassic Park was the star, if you will, was the special effects dinosaurs, and Last Action Hero is an amalgamation of all of the 80s. Like it's meant to be this 80s action movie
Mm-hmm.
where the kid goes into the movie, right? So it's like almost like representative of everything that happened, and it got absolutely crushed by Jurassic Park in the box office.
Yeah.
Like I think it made something like 100 million worldwide, and Jurassic Park made 400 million domestic, right? Like it's not even close.
Mm.
And using that as kind of that special effects then kind of took over as the star of the movie, kind of the spectacle of the movie. Whereas in these 80s movies, the hero himself is the spectacle, which is why they're often bigger than life.
Mm-hmm.
Why guys like, Stallone and Schwarzenegger, by being huge and having these presences, and the slickness to them, and being, Rambo, who, I think I think in the book it said his body count was like 500 and something by the end of all the Rambo movies, right? Like just doing these ridiculous feats, and then you kind of transition into the Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal, where the crazy martial arts is kind of the draw. And then it does touch a little bit on, some of the transitions of how we kind of got to out of that, and one was Die Hard. That's a huge piece in the book, because now you have a everyman hero, a
Mm-hmm.
relatable guy who's stuck in this situation and can't use, all of these crazy guns or
Mm-hmm.
muscles or martial arts. Like he has to get out of it the way that an actual cop would. And how popular that was, it started to build, it gave space for a new breed of hero to come in, which was kind of the starting point of this. And then as special effects got better and better, and you didn't need to do, it does, like, it gives some nods to like Jackie Chan, even though he wasn't an American star really back then,
Mm-hmm.
like doing all of his own stunts, right? Like nobody would do that other than Jackie Chan anymore because it's too dangerous, right? Like,
Right.
so even the stunts are special affected to some extent. And that kind of left this as sort of an interesting era. It talked a little bit. I mean, it touches on a lot of the stuff, like the Reaganism part of it, right? Like sort of this hawkish American, like pro-American, going around the world and saving all the peoples in the world, right? And how
Mm-hmm.
these kind of reflected that. And it focuses on these four guys because primarily they were the biggest stars and they had feuds with each other. Like Stallone and Schwarzenegger had a huge feud before Planet Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal, and pretty much everybody in Steven Seagal had a feud with Steven Seagal.
Yeah.
But particularly these two guys. And
Yeah,
so
there's
they,
a whole
yeah,
big.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Well, I guess what I was about to share is the little bit that I know, whereas you just read a book about it. So maybe I'll just go ahead and let you share the anecdotes.
Oh, I mean, some of the
But
anecdotes.
I've heard some about the feud. Is the point?
Yes, and there's lots of stuff in that they would take jabs at each other in the paper and on talk shows. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a story that he showed up. Jean-Claude Van Damme was at Steven or at not Steven Seagal's house, at Sylvester Stallone's house at a party, and Seagal showed up, and their accounts of what happened are vastly different. And Stallone says that Van Damme's is mostly correct, and Seagal's is absolutely incorrect. you know, about how they could, that they were going to fight it out, but Van Damme got scared because Steven Seagal is, the most impossible person to defeat. Um, so it talks about, like, again, some of their egos. It talks through like their transitions of like when they try to get out of action, and like especially Stallone's had a really bad run of trying to get into things like Oscar and some of the Stop or My Mom Will Shoot, whereas Schwarzenegger did Twins and was a massive comedy star right out the gate.
Kindergarten Cop.
Kindergarten Cop, yeah, he was able to make that transition faster. Um, Talks a little bit about, it does mention Chuck Norris. It goes into Dolph Lundgren because he's kind of tied to Stallone in that. And but those are much smaller pieces
Mm-hmm.
in the book. A lot of the Chuck Norris and Jackie Chan's are in like the same chapter, right?
Well, yeah, so that was one of the things that, like, when you initially presented it, I was a little bit confused in the theme because I had sort of brought up like Bruce Lee as what I thought was going to be an example of what you were talking about, but then it seemed like it was not quite that. But and what we settled on was let's focus on these American guys. But it also sounds just like these four guys in particular are the focus of the book.
Yes, because they're so it's so easy to point this lens, and one of the things the book does a really good job of, like, it's not really making an argument, it's just presenting things in a
Mm-hmm.
way where you kind of see the guy's argument and you can agree or disagree.
Sure.
But these guys are so representative of like that type of movie, like
Mm-hmm.
that's why we focused on them.
Yeah, it's
uh,
true. Yeah.
and it does talk about Bruce Lee in there because he was a inspiration to a lot of these guys, but he kind of mostly predates, kind of this, like he was doing this type of stuff, but it wasn't like
Mm-hmm.
when everybody was like, this was the thing to go see, right, in America.
Yeah.
So
Well, and then even when Jackie Chan was doing like Rumble in the Bronx and stuff, that was still probably considered niche compared to like the ones we're talking about today.
correct. And that's and what it's saying is that it didn't go away after Last Action Hero, it just changed. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the interesting thing about Jackie Chan, is that he didn't change, and he continued to do these things, whereas everybody else kind of transitioned into other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's really interesting things about like Jackie Chan, like having Rumble in the Bronx, but still deciding to go back to Hong Kong because it was, even though it was successful, it was still niche here,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't a project he could get a lot of. So he could go back to Hong Kong and make these kinds of movies and make Police Story 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and do all the stuff he likes doing.
Mm-hmm.
You
Well, of
know,
course, he came back when we started getting like the Shanghai Noon and Rush Hour movies, and so he kind of went back and forth quite a bit for a while there.
yes. Well, I mean, his whole life he kind of did that because he wanted to make it big in Hollywood. After he was big in Hong Kong, he wanted to make it big in Hollywood. Really couldn't find the right thing, so he went back to Hong Kong, and then he came and did Rumble in the Bronx. It was successful. Then he went back. Then, like I said, came back for Shanghai, and ultimately, like he won an Oscar. I mean, it was a Lifetime Achievement Award, but he did win an Oscar
Mm-hmm.
because he was true to his, like, he has a body of work that really never changed. Like he just kept finding interesting ways to do the same kind of
Yeah.
crazy stuff. Yeah.
And now he's Splinter in the new animated Ninja Turtles
Yes.
movie.
So, and it goes into that kind of the epilogue of like, it kind of talks about how the Expendables came about, and is sort of like a really cool nod to that, and how these guys realize that, you know, hey, if we just all lean into this, like we can make a ton of money, and we don't have to worry. And it's like, so there's this whole like, did the feud help because it was kind of, that's kind of how their characters were back
Yeah.
then. Like they couldn't have, could they have been friends like in the Expendables? Could you have done that back then, or was that really kind of part of the hype? Right? Was it like, these guys are just so badass that, they, who's better, right?
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger alone.
You
Yeah.
know, it's funny because the specific anecdote you shared about that one party with uh, Van
Seagal and
Damme
Van Damme.
and yeah, like so the version of that story that I was familiar with was actually the opposite account, which is that Seagal came in and was talking a lot of shit, and then when Van Damme basically said, "Okay, let's do it," then Seagal chickened out. And so that's that's the version that I had heard. So it's funny that they both have their alternate version.
Yes.
But it's also you can imagine that this rivalry between them is the sort of thing where even if it weren't real, you could almost imagine that they would want to invent it because it's kind of it's interesting drama, it's publicity,
Yeah.
people talking about them.
Well, and that there is a part of that. Like, I guess Van Damme did do that with Dolph Lundgren for Universal Soldier. Like, because there was a rumor that they didn't get along, which originally they didn't, but then they became friends, and but they carried that through all the press. They acted like they didn't like each other.
Mm-hmm.
So it is all just showmanship. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it was a fun read just to kind of hear all those backstories, like, and it does a very good job of acknowledging all the things that I think you were hesitant about how it's not this cut and dry. This is just the lens in which we are going to tell this story, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And all the stuff of like all the other people that were involved, like the John McTiernans, like how he's involved in that, James Cameron, um, how Terminator, like that's such an odd thing, like to take a guy whose movies were all about being the hero and making quips
Mm-hmm.
to a guy who doesn't speak and is the villain, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yet his lines are still the most memorable from the movie.
Yeah.
And then and it really leans into Arnold kind of embracing the special effects early, right? Like he got into
Mm-hmm.
Terminator 2 very early. Like that could only be done once they had the technology. And there's cool stuff about how they purposely chose Robert Patrick because nobody really had an opinion of him, so he was perfect to be a malleable.
Yeah. To be, it's so easy to forget that the initial marketing for Terminator 2 did not reveal that Arnie was going to be a good Terminator that time. And so seeing it for the first time, you don't, you see Robert Patrick and you see Arnie both trying to find um, uh, John Connor, and you don't know which one of them is the good one. Not
Yeah.
until that one moment when they're all three in that hallway. And so I think it's kind of fun to try to remember that feeling when you watch that movie because everyone knows it back and forward to today. So, but playing deliberately with this expectation that we remember him as the bad guy in the first one.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the second kind of piece to that is, even though he was obliterated by the special effect dinosaurs in Last Action Hero, and he was sad about that, like he found the perfect vehicle in True Lies
Mm-hmm.
to, put himself back in there and use the special effects, but use his personality, right? Like, so it's
Mm-hmm.
not, it was, it was refreshing to kind of read and say, like, okay, yeah, he's not trying to convince us that this is a thing. It's just like, hey, this is a cool thing that happened that kind of shows the transition, but it's not the only part of the story.
Yeah. So,
So that's the backdrop of it. Yeah.
all right, nice. So I don't know, what order do you want to talk about these in? I mean, I suppose we could try to go in chronological order, but three of them are between 1987 and 88. So I think Rambo First Blood Part 2 is actually the earliest if we were going to do them in chronological order.
Yeah, I think I like chronological order with maybe one caveat, since aren't both Above the Law and Bloodsport 88.
I believe that's correct. Yeah, and then Predator is 87.
So yeah, I think we do Rambo and then Predator. So because again, the sort of Stallone, Schwarzenegger, and it's
Mm-hmm.
chronological. And then
I
since
vote for Above the Law before Bloodsport because I like Bloodsport more.
that's kind of what I was thinking. So
All
we'll have
right.
to end Above the Law.
Sure.
That's what I was proposing. Caveat.
Yeah, well, I think I think it sounds like we are maybe on the same page then that or I don't know. You know, we're going to start with Rambo First Blood Part 2. So my overall take on these four movies is that two of them are great. One of them is silly but obviously influential, and then one of them is it's got good bits. But do we agree on which ones those are? Probably.
Yeah.
So Rambo, First Blood, Part 2. Um, so I had not watched any of the Rambo movies before we decided to do this, and so because of that, I can definitely now see why Part 2 is the one that we would want to talk about for this topic as opposed to the first one. But I wanted to see the first one, so I did actually watch both. And the first one, pretty great. It's a good movie, and it's an actual sort of like real movie, and it certainly got action in it, but it's probably really a drama more than we really think of action movies. Certainly more than the others here are, but I think I messaged you 15 minutes into Part 2 and just said, LMAO, these movies are so different.
They're very different. It's very much influenced kind of by like Stallone's experience with Rocky, right? Like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the first Rocky was very similar to Rambo, right? Like very good, much more heavy on the drama part of it. He's a much more relatable character. He's a unique character but relatable. And then you see like Rocky 2 is mostly like that.
Mm-hmm.
Rocky 3 gets a little bit into the Mr. T showmanship, and then Rocky 4 is just so, I mean, it's a great movie, but it's not the same movie.
Yeah.
Like it's so much about the pro America like guy like I mean, he's like way more ripped and glistening, and like the bad guy's even more ridiculous, and that
Mm-hmm.
transition and realizing like that's what it takes to be successful now was why when they revisited Rambo, he kind of jumped from 1 to 4 in the Rockies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it's not even the same. It's the same character in name and I guess
Yeah.
backstory, but
Well, I did appreciate that they start Part 2 with him in prison for what he did in the first movie. I mean, he's certainly a sympathetic character in the first movie, but yes, you do still go to prison after that. Um, uh, the first movie, like for anyone who, like me, hasn't seen it, I'm not gonna like summarize the whole thing, but the basic premise is that he is a traumatized Vietnam vet with PTSD. That when he's walking through a town where the local cops are assholes and they pick on him, he overreacts and then they overreact and the whole thing just balloons up until you've got like the National Guard called in and they're using rocket propelled grenades in the middle of the forest and all of that sort of thing. He's blowing up ammunition stores and and then we do eventually get him to surrender. His old commanding officer gets called in to be the guy for most of the movie who's telling the cops how they're doing it wrong and how they're just going to get themselves killed if they don't listen to him. And then so now in Part 2 we begin with this commanding officer saying, I know you're in prison, but maybe you could get out of prison if you come and do the things that you're good at doing. What do you say? And he agrees, and then the movie happens. Um, but boy, just right off the bat, the tone is just heightened to the point of near parody. Although I don't know how much I'm sure it played as silly at the time, but I don't know if it played quite as heightened as it does today. I mean, right now there are so many bits from it that are like things that are making fun of this kind of movie are obviously pulling from this movie in order to make fun of it. Like the UHF Rambo scene where Weird Al imagines he's Rambo, right? Like he's pulling all that stuff from this movie. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. And so having
I don't know
only
if you're asking me if I think it was parody or not.
I guess I just what I mean is since you just read a book about it, like does it talk about the reception at the time?
Yeah, it wasn't parody. That's what people wanted to see, was like somebody who just kind of rises up against all odds and can just kick ass, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do it honestly at the time, like against foreigners, right? Like
Yeah.
what it did was essentially what it did more subtly than there's like than I think one of the Chuck Norris ones. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
Chuck Norris movie where it's essentially like one of those POW MIA ones where like the whole point of it is to go win the Vietnam War, right? Like he wanted to win
Mm-hmm.
the Vietnam War on screen for Americans, since they were feeling in the 70s like there was so much like discontent about having just lost this war, and like the inflation and like all these things. And this was kind of like the American culture at that time of the 80s is like rising out of that. And so
Mm-hmm.
this subtly goes back and like kind of wins against the commies, right? Like
Yeah. Well,
it's designed to be like he went in and won the Vietnam War by himself, which then Chuck
yeah.
Norris like actually did in a movie.
Mm-hmm. Well, like so one of the things that I thought was interesting in the first movie is that you go through the whole movie really feeling like he's a very sympathetic dude who has just got hassled. He didn't want any trouble, but they provoked it, and then by the time it escalated kind of without his control, and then after a certain point, he's just defending himself, right? And so then you get all the way to the end when he finally has his breakdown and rants about all the things that is really bothering him. A lot of it is all about how like they wouldn't let us do what we had to do to win. And then I was watching the whole thing, and then like when he gets to that point, I'm like, oh, okay, well, all right, that's. I mean, I believe that this guy would feel that way, but there's certainly like to kind of follow up your point. There is certainly no allowance in part two that anyone who lives in the country of Vietnam has any redeeming qualities at all.
Well, except the girl.
Well, except the girl who is she Vietnamese? Is she though?
Yeah, I guess you're right, but she is there and is
She's
used.
present in the country. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what this. I mean, this isn't. It's not what I don't know what this plot technique is called. It's not a MacGuffin, but like she exists only to be like to be his friend, so that when she
Yeah.
dies, he can
Mhm.
justify going back and kicking ass,
Yeah.
right?
She speaks broken English with an American accent.
Yes, and of course, like it just it leans into the government corruption and cover
Mhm.
up, because he finds these POWs, but they're going to pretend that he didn't because
Yeah. Well,
they
or
want
that
to.
it was a whole conspiracy where they thought they had it all set up where he was basically set up to specifically find an empty camp that was empty because they moved everyone out of it specifically at the time that he was supposed to be there. And it was only the fact that he got hung up on the plane and it wrecked the whole schedule that meant that he saw the real prisoners, because the whole thing was supposed to just make the people who wanted us to keep looking for POWs to be satisfied and stop doing that.
Right. So it's got a little bit of, don't trust the foreign commies, don't trust the American government. Like, you
Yeah.
got to do this on your own because that's the only way to get it done. Like,
Yeah.
it didn't play straight is not the right way to say it, but it
Yeah.
definitely
Well,
it
it's got some criticisms for the US government for sure, related to like corruption and dishonesty, but there's also still the huge underlying current of, if you had just let us do it properly the first time, we would have taken care of this. But no, it's all these computers that are the problem.
yeah, bureaucrat. And
Yeah.
yeah,
So the first time they showed us this room full of computers, and it's like, all of this is for you, like for your mission. I was just like, yeah, this room's getting blown up by the end, and then it did. I was very pleased. Like, it's silly, but in a satisfying way.
yes. Yeah. So the movie is not parody, but the movie is not subtle,
No.
you know. Um,
He does
so
burn down a civilian village in order to take down the guys that are chasing him.
but it does have the Rambo scene of when he decides, like, so he's not wearing the bandana.
Mm-hmm.
He initially does his mission, right? He's going in to do this mission. He's found the POWs. He's coming back to report them, and then I forget exactly. Like, there's a weird conversation between him and the government guy. I can't remember exactly how they like. He gets a weird feeling from them. I don't think they
So
directly tell him. I don't remember what the.
I
Yeah.
think what it is that the guy who likes him, who had brought him into the mission, is determined to go and pick him up at the extraction anyway. Like, even though the guy who's really in charge keeps telling him, oh, there's no way he's going to make it, it's a waste of resources, but our good guy colonel says, no, I'm going to fly out there in the helicopters anyway, right? But then when they show up and he's actually got a POW with him,
Oh, it's right. They leave. That's right.
then the other guy calls the helicopters back, even though our good guy colonel's right there saying, what? So they leave him specifically there, as a result. So that's the big turn there.
Right. That's the first kind of like, oh, these guys are not here for me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm on my own, right? But I've got her with me,
Mm-hmm.
and she trusts me and she's going to help me figure out how to get out of this. And then she dies and he kind of loses it and decide. And the scene is of of Stallone from the back, putting on the red bandana and his back muscles flexing and, tying it and becoming Rambo that we
Oh
know.
yeah, yeah.
The bandana. Yeah. And it's still kind of a fun scene.
Yeah,
Like,
so here's the thing. I've criticized a couple of things. This movie is goofy, but a lot of the action is pretty fun. Like, if you can just kind of get on board with what it's doing, a lot of it is very sort of heightened and silly, but in a fun way. Like the whole scene where he's made his explosive tipped arrows,
Mhm.
and he's killed a bunch of guys already, but then he's like standing at the waterfall, and oh, there's the one guy he left who has a handgun and gets up and just shooting at him, and then he's just letting him shoot, and he's slowly drawing the explosive tipped arrow, and he fires, and he just blows up this guy using this explosive tipped anti-tank arrow to blow up one guy who has already shot all of the bullets out of his handgun. Like, it's silly, but it's fun. And then
Yes.
you get some, big helicopter chase stuff and explosions towards the end. Like, yeah, I mean, this movie is silly, but it's fun. It's heightened in a way that I enjoyed.
Yeah. I I I enjoyed rewatching it. Like you said, it's it's not highbrow cinema, but man,
Yeah.
it's it's fun.
Hmm.
It, for what it's trying to do, like it delivers, right? Like it's just this testosterone fueled,
Hmm.
you know, one man kick ass show,
It's,
right?
Team America. It's just, yeah, it's like, this is the kind of movie that movie is riffing on.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and then it it starts, which is echoed later in Predator. Um, the other big scene is when he handles like an M60, like it's the big machine, like belt fed machine guns, right?
Hmm.
Which normally like prop on the ground, right? Because they're
Yeah.
so heavy and the recoil is so big. But
Hmm.
he handles it like just in the cradle of his arm and just like his hand feeding it himself, right? Like it's so over the top, but it's like that's what people wanted to see. Like this
Yeah.
guy is so strong that he can shoot this badass machine gun. Like he doesn't
Hmm.
have to have all the other stuff. He can just run around with this thing.
Hmm.
you know?
I mean, he's a superhero.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he is a superhero in a without superpowers, right? Like that are
Hmm.
just being really big and strong. Like he
Yeah.
so
Yeah, so what I'll just reiterate though for everyone is that I found it really interesting watching First Blood and then First Blood Part 2 back to back because they're so different. While Part 2 is kind of big and silly and cheesy in that sort of goofy way, the first one is really not. The first one is much more serious and grounded. Like it's got action in it, but it is, well, maybe towards the end when he is blowing up a whole sporting goods store just to briefly distract the cop who's trying to snipe him from the roof across the street. But in any case, though, that I really liked that one too, even though part two is clearly more along the lines of what we're talking about here, which is the big, the guy who can do it all and who can save the day because he's larger than life.
yeah, and I just to kind of close my part of it, I came at it a different way. But similar in a sense. So when we were kids, like Rambo was Rambo, right? Like it was a character that we
Yeah,
knew about. I think it even had a Saturday morning cartoon at one point. Um, like he was a character in something.
yeah.
And
He's
so when I was first like able to watch Rambo, like everything was like pointing you to Rambo First Blood Part 2 to the point where I was like, is that just the name of the first movie?
mm,
And then I did some reading or research or whatever, like it figured out that there was actually a Rambo First Blood, and I was like, oh well, that must be the one I'm supposed to watch first. And so I started watching it, and I'm like, this guy's like, it's interesting, but this guy doesn't seem like the guy I'm thinking of. Like this doesn't seem that
mm,
cool. Like that
yeah.
was a good way to watch some butt kicking, right? Like I think this was probably around more like when I was watching Van Damme movies that I was able to go back and watch Rambo because of my age, right? Like
Hmm.
couldn't watch it when it came out. I was 6, and I was like, this, it doesn't suck, but it like sucks for what I was trying to watch
Yeah,
because I didn't realize that, like, kind of like you, I didn't realize it was going to be completely different. And then,
definitely different vibe.
yeah. And then got to the next one. And then finally, like, Rambo 3 comes out, and that thing is like this movie on steroids, right? It's absurd. Like, that one is kind of parody, but
Man, I have a hard time imagining that because Tar 2 is already so over the top. The UHF parody barely changes it.
it does, it's
It
just
it,
Weird
it
Al
doesn't
doing it.
even really change it at all. It's just, yeah, exactly. It's just Weird Al in Stallone's place wearing like a muscle suit. But otherwise it's like he's just doing the same stuff.
Yes, it's hilarious.
Yeah.
So then the other kind of piece to this is that this movie did so well, and it made Stallone. It was his first movie, so it just a little backstory. Like it was killing Stallone after Rocky that he could only keep playing Rocky.
Mhm.
He tried other movies, but he was just wasn't getting the right thing. Like there's movies like Rhinestone and like these just awful movies. Like this has kind of been his thing, right? He does this big movie,
Hmm.
he tries something else. He's actually a really, I mean, he wrote Rocky.
Yeah.
You know, he's very dramatically inclined.
Yeah, well, I mean, we covered Rocky when we were originally going through the AFI list, and like that was one of the biggest surprises to me of the whole list because, I mean, I knew it must be good if it was on the list, but I just, I had no idea that it's actually kind of this really like sensitive, funny character study and not just a sports movie.
Yeah. And it's very, I mean, we talked about it all, you know, it's not truly his own story, but he's taking from his own
Mm-hmm.
life. And he was so successful with it that he wanted to do these other projects and he couldn't. And the only way he could make money again was to play Rocky again. And then he tried other things and then he had to play Rocky again. And it was just like, and so then he does Rambo and he gets that. And that one's a popular movie. And then it's just like, and now I got to play Rambo again. And so
Mm-hmm.
then he does this movie. And what it did though was it shed the I'm Rocky only, right? Like the
Yeah.
Rambo by itself wasn't enough, First Blood.
Mm-hmm.
But then when First Blood Part Two came out, like he became now like dynamic in a weird way, right? Like because
Yeah.
he's Rocky Rambo, but at least he's recognized for something else.
Mm-hmm.
So he really just like leaned into it and loved it, and like bought a chain with Rambo on it, and like yeah, I mean it was, and it was just kind of funny to see like him just kind of embrace this, and then again Rocky 4 is much more like this, and then Rambo 3, and he just kind of went on this little train of doing these types of movies.
Well, I mean, the money was there, I'm sure.
Yeah. And yeah, so you know, and I think part of the issue he was having is that he has so much control over Rocky, and then he would go to these other projects and he'd want to exert control over them, but they
Mm-hmm.
weren't his story and they weren't as personal to him. But you know, and so you get into these weird things where like the movies never kind of made sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is one where he just like kind of turned himself over into this character, and anyway, so it's fun. Rambo 3 is if it's very silly. It's not as fun. Even at the time, to me, it wasn't as fun. Even
Mm.
though it's more of the same, it's just it's too much because it's like basically taking this and like then going and winning a war in Afghanistan, right? Like so, it's the same exact thing. They ported it over and
Mm-hmm.
just dialed it up. You know?
Well, and the thing is with this one, he has a personal connection in the sense that like the POWs, John Rambo is a Vietnam vet, and so the guys we left behind, like it's personal to him, you
Right.
know.
You can get to it. Like a movie gives you enough that you can get to where he gets to, even though it's kind of forced. You
Yeah.
see what it makes sense, right?
Sure, sure. I mean, they contrive a reason, I'm sure, but it's not just
Right.
built in.
Right. No, I'm
Um,
saying in Rambo 2, it like makes
oh,
sense.
right. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I
So
follow you. Yeah.
yeah, no, it's much more contrived in Rambo 3. Like I didn't rewatch that because even though I was enjoying rewatching some of these other movies
Yeah.
outside of these, that was one I just wasn't gonna pick up. It's just too
Mhm.
much. So anyway.
All right. Well, so let's go ahead and move on to Predator then. 1987's Arnold Schwarzenegger vehicle. Also featuring Jesse Ventura and Carl Weathers, among others. Um,
Yep.
uh, this is a fun movie, huh? I mean,
Yeah. Well, it's directed by John McTiernan,
hmm
who did Die Hard, I believe.
I believe that's right. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Um, had several really good projects, but
Including Last Action Hero.
Last Action Hero, yes, he did the Die Hards. He did Hunt for Red October.
Hmm.
Um, so he's got a lot of really good stuff in here, and so he gets this project, and they get Arnold to do it, and Arnold just leans into this thing because you know, he had done Conan, obviously, which was just kind of like, I mean, it's Conan,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
that was kind of how he broke onto the scene. And then he was in the same thing. He was like looking to do something different. And that's when Commando showed up. And Commando is kind of silly. It's very much like Taken in a way, like he's
Mm-hmm.
avenging people who've kidnapped his daughter, and he's able to go over the top because you believe he would do it for his daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it's sort of this urban war on these bad guys. But the whole time, like he's making all these jokes in it. And then he goes and they get him into Terminator because he looks like what you would create if you wanted a killing machine,
Mm-hmm.
right? But he had to completely change his personality. I mean, now that we've seen him as the governor, his personality is much more fun,
Mm-hmm.
right? Watch any of those documentaries on him or Pumping Iron or any of the stuff from back then, like he's just a he's a he loves that
Well,
he's making movies, right?
in
And
Pumping Iron, it's interesting because he definitely had not honed yet the persona that he eventually adopts because he's kind of funny. He obviously has a sense of humor, but he also kind of comes across like an asshole
yeah,
in
I
Pumping
mean,
Iron.
yeah, he had kind of an ego and all that type of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, obviously, Terminator was massively successful as sort of out of the blue, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it didn't seem like in the script, it seemed like this was just a thing, and then he was given the chance to do Predator, which then he finally was able to take that. How can I be, use that presence of being like big enough without having to say things,
Mm-hmm.
which the Commando, he's big, but that's not really the thing like it is. And I don't just mean like his size, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
whole presence he brings to the
Right.
movie.
Yeah.
He doesn't do that in Commando. I mean, he does kind of in Conan, but it's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then this allows him to make the jokes, be serious,
Mm-hmm.
be there's a little bit of drama. He has to have a little drama in it, and dramatic acting, and yet still have this huge presence of like a guy you would believe could take on a game big game hunting alien that has all these tools, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like it's just such a well executed conceit in this movie because what we do is we start off with Arnold, who certainly we now, but also I think he'd been in enough stuff then that you just you immediately know he's going to be a badass, right? But he's also got a whole team of also badasses that work well together and are competent, right?
Yep.
And we even set up initially that we got Carl Weathers as Dylan there, who's the guy who's maybe not on the level. We're not so sure about him, and he's not as good. Like they have to threaten him because he keeps making noise and stuff when they're trying to sneak around, and it's all set up where they are going after they think rescuing some hostages because Dutch, Arnold's character, makes a whole big deal about how they're not an assassin squad. They're a rescue team. They don't take assassination jobs, they take rescue missions. And then it's revealed, of course, that, oh, well, there technically were some hostages, but mostly what we wanted you to do is to go and mess these guys up and figure out what's going on because it's also clear, wait, there was another team that they lost contact with, what happened there, and then you start getting little bits and pieces, just the slow rolling in of like something else is happening. Of course, also we opened the movie with a shot of a spaceship, but we forget about that after a while. But yeah, just establishing him as a badass with a whole team of badasses, but then the process of the predator taking out all of the others one by one, until it's just the two of them left. I mean, that's just cool. And as much as we're talking about Arnold being big, and the idea of these larger than life action heroes, there's the bit where the predator grabs him by the throat and holds him up against the tree. He's like his feet are a foot off the ground. You
Yep.
know.
I mean, that's really cool. Well,
Yeah.
and that's also partly why, like, again, why this movie was, I think, even a little bit is better than Rambo is because it does have the team. Like, eventually, he does have to face the Predator one on
Yeah.
one, but he does work as a highly functioning team of
Mm-hmm.
guys you're rooting for. But they chose to cast guys who could also play larger than life people. Like, so
Mm-hmm.
it's not just a good team; it's a good team of really big dudes.
Yeah. Well, and
Who
then
are
like
pretty badass.
yeah,
Yeah.
even the ones that aren't like beefy are presented as competent, like good at their job, and this is a good team that works well together, right? Like you got Shane Black in there, and he's not a big muscly guy, but he's part of the team. And everyone has their own weird things, and most of them play pretty well. There is, of course, Duke, who does the weird dry shaving thing. I don't know. I feel like that bit of business only exists so they can do the bit where he's so tense that he cuts himself with it. Otherwise, like it doesn't make any sense. I don't get it at all. Do you have any insight on that?
No. I mean, other than just having watched it, it wasn't like a major focus of anything I
No,
read.
I
As
just like I every time I watch it, it bumps me a little bit because I'm just like, what is he doing? It's so weird. His
yeah,
skin would be so messed up from that. It's
it's
bad for you.
I mean, I think you're right. It's just taking something that is very common amongst stuff like this, is having some sort of stress relieving tick that's kind of
Yeah.
like your to, but then knowing that you can write that into a way to up the drama, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so like I don't hate it. It just like every time I see it, I'm just like that's a weird thing to do. And I wonder how they came up with that. And I can't help but wonder, is it just because they had the idea of someone who's like shaving and they're tense, they have to freeze and they're so tense that they cut themselves and they break the razor against their face. But then they were like, well, okay, but why would they be shaving? Maybe there's a guy who's that's just like his thing. He's just like shaving all the time. Like I can't help but think that that must be what it was. But
No, I mean,
I
sounds
mean
right.
this is such a trivial bit, of course, in the movie, but I just like it sticks in my brain every time I watch it. But
So,
we get
but
oh yeah, go ahead.
speaking of knives, though, they made sure that the knife that Schwarzenegger has in Predator was, I think, like 1 inch longer than the Rambo knife. Just as like again, just a silly. It's a silly feud. Like it wasn't. There was no
Mhm.
true bad blood between these guys. Like I think was with Seagal, but like that's kind of a funny one. Like
Mhm.
we're just gonna make the knife a little bigger. Yeah.
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 But
So
like
you on your next thing you were gonna
well,
say?
yeah, this is just kind of ties back to just how much I love the whole conceit of this plot and the way that it builds, because they start with a fully developed premise and cast that could have just been a whole other movie that no aliens showed up in,
Yep.
right? It's got all of the pieces and feels sufficiently developed that it could have just been that other movie, and that the alien showing up interrupts what would have been a different movie. And it really feels that way, but you see that these guys having to respond in real time to what even is happening right now. Why do these guys have no skin on? What's that in the forest? The woman says the jungle came alive and took him. What does that even mean? Like and it's just such a fun premise, and just the conception of the alien as not just a monster, but a hunter, a predator, like the idea that it's not just killing for no purpose, it's doing it like for the thrill of it. It's going to do things where it's going to occasionally make the smart decision and not just rush in. It's going to occasionally do things where, like, oh no, I've caught him, I've got the human cornered and unarmed. That's not fair. I want to make it cooler, so I'm going to take my mask off.
Yeah.
And just like that sort of thing, like that's just such, not that Alien, for example, isn't a great movie and isn't cool, but they wanted it to not be Alien, is the point. They wanted it to be different than the xenomorph from Alien. And they did. They succeeded in having the Predator be its own thing to the point where everyone decided that what if the aliens fought the Predators? It managed to be enough of its own separate thing in a movie which you could imagine it just being Alien in the jungle, right? But they
Right.
made it enough of a distinct identity that it stands on its own, even when directly compared against, say, Alien.
Oh, I agree. I think it's phenomenal, and it's kind of funny how they got there, right? Because it's not that wasn't what is it? I mean, the story was the story, right? But
Mm-hmm.
this is an iconic look, and I think I texted you, but the original person cast to be the Predator was Jean Claude Van Damme.
I think that's an amazing coincidence. I had no idea.
Yeah, and it was very early in his career. Like it was done as not like as an extra, but like it was a lower in part because he wasn't going to get any FaceTime and things like this. But the original concept, the suit when it arrived, it didn't allow him to do any of his moves or anything like that. Like so it
Mm-hmm.
was like very clunky, like he couldn't like it had like weird shaped knees and stuff. It kind of looked like a lizard
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't work. And Van Damme quit because he couldn't do what he wanted to do.
Yeah, it's like why even hire me if I can't do anything?
Right. And then the sort of irony behind that is that like just him pointing out that like you can't do anything in this suit and it's going to be like clunky no matter if Van Damme, who is a ballet trained martial artist who has incredible like body awareness, right?
Flexibility.
Flexibility, like, but just even just everything with him, just if he can't do it, then nobody's going to be able to make this thing work. So they rejiggered the whole thing and they like had to pay somebody like last minute, like $1 million, like design this new thing. And they ended up with what became an iconic costume,
Mm-hmm.
which you could kind of see like their hesitancy when it first came is like, this guy's going to, it's going to be like a dude wearing like fishnet and a helmet. Like what? That's weird.
Well, yeah, it's I think part of what makes the design work so well, it feels developed and thought through because there's layers to it, right? Because first, there's the camo, the active camouflage system, which is just a neat effect generally, where it's just so effective in the sense that if he's not moving, even when we know what the effect looks like, you can't really spot him against the noise of the jungle. You only really can see it when he's moving. But like
Right.
so just
Can't
it
keep up. Like there's like a
yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so just like with the 80s technology, they made a really cool effective effect that like it reads as realistic but also scary and like, oh gosh, what is that? Right? But then you've also underneath that you've got this creature. It's big, it's agile. It's got this weird helmet and it's got all of these gears and gizmos and things like the weird little laser thing that shoots the darts. It's got the little shoulder cannon that points wherever he's looking. You got the things that come out of his gauntlet, the blade. So he's got like all the toys and weapons too. But then at long last, at the end for the climax, he's also can take it off, and he's got a weird alien scary face in there, and he's badass. Just got his own claws and his own physical size and strength, and it's just all of those layers together combine to make a really memorable monster.
Yes. And and they did a great job of like him kind of picking those guys off one by one, sort of leaving anything else out. Everything else is there's no other conflict in the movie, right? There's no other
Mm-hmm.
bad guys. And this is sort of a interestingly enough kind of a McTiernan like stroke of genius, right? So he's getting calls the whole time they're making the movie about like, you need more machine guns, you need more machine guns, like you've got to have more stuff happening. And he's like, the only way to do that is to like put other people or put something else in here where they're shooting at, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then came up with this stroke of genius, which has turned out to be one of the most memorable scenes, in which he made sure, again, he like, I don't remember how he came up with it, but there was like a certain amount of time or amount of rounds or something that they needed to go through so that it would be like enough machine gun fire. And I don't
Yeah.
remember the specifics. And so he makes one scene with the camo where they know something's out there, they think it's a whole team of bad guys, and so they just unleash this assault, and it's
Mm-hmm.
muscles flexing, it's machine guns firing, like it's all the things that Rambo is from start to finish
Mm-hmm.
in 5 minutes, and then
Yeah.
he's like, I'm done,
You
you
know,
know.
I never thought about that, but that is kind of a stroke of genius in the sense that you have a scene that works on its own, but is actively designed for us to feel before they stop firing. Okay, I think that's enough. I think you got. I think whatever you're gonna get, you've got at this point. Um, and so to put the audience in a position of themselves saying, "Okay, that's enough machine guns," before you finish with the machine guns, but just before, and then
Yep.
you don't have the audience wanting more machine guns.
Yeah, nobody leaves that movie saying, I wish there was more machine gun fire,
Mm-hmm.
and he did it without killing a single entity.
Yeah.
And it leads to, doesn't isn't that where that's where he
Yeah.
bleeds, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where
So it,
it's actually before he does the whole minigun, thing, but it's that scene. It's the first couple of shots at it, but it escapes by the time they're firing after it with the minigun. But yes, it is the result of that exchange that he starts bleeding for the first time, and the woman sees it first and doesn't tell anybody right away.
right. And then ultimately they find out, and that's what leads to the, like, gives them that kind of that extra sense of like, well,
Yeah.
hey, if it bleeds, we can kill it,
Mm-hmm.
which is a great line,
Yeah.
you know. So yeah, it's woven together, some by happenstance, which is how things work, right? Like there's
Mm-hmm.
some luck in there, there's some genius. Sometimes genius is based on luck, and the fact that he was just like, guys, I'm tired of being asked to put more machine guns in, so just put all the machine guns in.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I noticed in this viewing that I had never really picked up on before is specifically that when the predator is watching them through his thermal vision early on before he's attacked anybody, that he is actively sort of translating and learning their language and recording audio samples of them.
Yeah.
I had never quite processed that that's what it was doing. And in particular, at the very end, when he starts the little self destruct and starts laughing, I had always thought it's just like, okay, that's this weird alien laugh, I guess. I had never put together that he is actually just playing back Billy's laugh from earlier.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very cool. And I honestly, I won't even take credit for realizing it specifically, except that the sound, I was watching it with closed captions on, and the closed captions say that's what's happening. And I was like, oh, okay. I'd never put that together before this viewing.
That's funny. I mean, I guess, yeah, I can see why you hadn't, but yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think it's great because
It's
it
subtle.
does, it's subtle, but it allows for an impactful climax, which by the
Mm-hmm.
way has no guns in it.
Mm-hmm.
And because they can communicate, right? Like they don't have a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a baseline for them being able to communicate outside of even just the laugh, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
because he can understand a little bit about what they're saying. It's not
Mm-hmm.
perfect, but it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you at least gave us this, right?
Sure. Well, and then we don't know what the little, like, we can't process the numbers, but we see the red display where there's three things and then there's two things, and then we can say, oh, it's a countdown. We don't
Yeah.
have to be able to read it. We can see that. And then also cool, it's a very non-traditional explosion. You know what I mean? Like when it goes off, it isn't just a big fireball like we might have expected.
Yeah. it's all very good.
Mm-hmm.
So
Predator, good movie,
good movie.
great movie. Yeah. So, all right. Do we want to
I'm gonna
go?
adjust my blinds real quick.
Okay.
Probably
Uh,
transition.
sure, sure. Well, so I think as we had previously decided, we'll next be moving to 1988's Steven Seagal picture, Above the Law, starring Steven Seagal and also apparently Sharon Stone as his wife, who with very few lines because it's just a very minor role at that point. But I thought that was I didn't know she was in it. But also more prominently, we also have Pam Grier in kind of the second lead as like his assigned partner. And I love Pam Grier. I don't think she gets to do all that much here. I feel like she's capable of doing more than the movie gives her to do, but she at least gets to do a couple cool things.
Yes. So I think that might have made it worse on the
Oh,
blinds. I
no,
think a weird angle and weird light on myself. Either way,
it's fine.
maybe one day I'll invest in a ring light. So yeah, this movie is. I mean, it's what we're looking for when we wanted to watch a Steven
Yeah,
Seagal movie. It's
it's kind of all over the place. Like it's got some fun stuff for sure.
yes, it does, and it gets to showcase all the things that he wanted to showcase,
Mm-hmm.
and I I mean his movies to your I think your point here earlier was I don't think these movies have held up as much. You know,
Not as much.
it's it's really just this vehicle for him to do what he's doing here, right? Like, which
Mm-hmm.
is fight people in close combat, and have these hints at like Zen Buddhism, and kind of being this weird, like
Mm-hmm.
almost like trying to be a modern samurai. Uh, it's the backstory on this one's even weirder because this is essentially the story that he kind of pretended to tell was his like own backstory, like that he had like ties to the CIA.
Mm.
Like he's a really weird dude,
Yeah.
and again, I'll directly reference the book. Like it's not they're not a big fan of him, but I don't think that it's unfair because it's not told as like Steven Seagal is weird, Steven Seagal is this. It's just literally story after story of this dude just being a really weird guy and super egotistical
Yeah.
and only wanting projects where like he gets to do these kinds of things, and where he is and again at the time in 1988 it was kind of fun, right? Because it was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, like watch this badass like do this stuff. It it's just not as much fun anymore because he's not funny. He's not larger than life. Like his presence is sort of because of just
Mm-hmm.
his
Yeah.
abilities. Yeah,
He's got a unique energy, an unusual energy, but it's so often a strange energy. It's an unpredictable energy. Like he enters the scene, like any given scene, he walks into the room, you have no idea what he's about to do.
yeah, and he's it was it was interesting at the time because he's kind of soft spoken,
Mm-hmm.
and he you can feel that he could kick anybody's ass, like in the way the movies are shown at least,
Mm-hmm.
but yet he's not bragging about that. He's not making quips really. Like there is a difference to his character. Like his character differentiates itself from some of these other characters
Mm-hmm.
that in a way, like I said, I think at the time it was much more interesting because it was new. But then as he kind of went on, and he was always like he left people in his personal life feeling the way we feel on screen, that he just had this weird energy
Mm-hmm.
and this weird ego. And the book doesn't dwell on this part of it, but it does mention like some of the like whether I don't know if they all came during Me Too or stuff, but just some of the you know harassment things that have come against some of these stars.
Mm-hmm.
But really differentiates like kind of how the things that were levied against like Stallone and Schwarzenegger is just more being like them maybe taking their fact that their fame and that
Yeah.
women like kind of maybe taking it too far, and not, and not but this guy was like weird and creepy.
Yeah.
Like there were some things that he did, like there were like co-stars of his that he would like invite to like read scripts at like midnight, and then he'd say like the way you're reading the script, I think it requires like the specific massage, and like try to take him into his bedroom, and like they would leave, at least the ones that were on record. I don't know that
Mm,
everybody, like, it was just weird dude.
yeah.
And going back and watching the movies, it's not like I'm not saddled with me knowing that he's a weird guy in general, like because he displays himself as a weird guy in the movies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just his character in the movie is introduced as a guy from America whose family has mob ties, apparently, who gets so enamored with Japanese martial arts that he goes to Japan and trains there. And then, because he's such a badass martial artist, he gets recruited by the CIA. But then he quits the CIA because they're corrupt and evil, and he's too good to do that. So he comes back to the States to become a cop. But also, he's a cop that frequently uh, just picks fights and kicks doors down and disregards due process entirely. And there's a great, there's a bit where I just laughed so much in the movie later because one of the Act Two turns where he finally gets suspended is presented as like, oh no, these sleazy guys are coming after me now with this. But the thing is,
He did everything.
he did all of that stuff they're saying. He walked into a bar and he picked fights with people who he had no idea of knowing, like, that they had anything to do with any of it. Like he is definitely in the one instigating violence in many of those confrontations, and he's not following any kind of a legal process. And there's a little bit of it's his movie, so he gets to be right about all of his suspicions, but still he's certainly acting as though he is above the law, even though the title is supposed to be coming from the idea that he is saying that the bad CIA people think that they're above the law and they aren't, and so they need to be brought down, even though he's the one that's also frequently just disregarding everybody's civil rights. And what's funny too is that they explicitly call out that his family has mob ties, but they are presented as unambiguous good in the movie because the only thing his mobbed up family ever does is help out in hiding his wife when the drug dealers are after him. And it's so weird to introduce that plot element in the story and just say, oh yeah, his family's in the mob, but they're all right. Not like those drug dealers or the CIA. um, and not even just the CIA. It's like this guy is the bad one. It's not even the rest of them. It's this one. This guy Zagan is the bad guy, and if we can just get rid of him.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was saying. This came from some bizarre interview he did in like some martial arts magazine, right? That didn't have any journalistic standards, and
Mm-hmm.
that he like everything up to him like becoming the cop, right? Like this whole like all the things that led to him moving to Japan, becoming such a badass that the CIA wanted him, but they were so corrupt that he had to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And but yet in his regular life, he decided then to go be a movie star. Like it was like this mostly bizarrely concocted thing. And they
Mm-hmm.
printed this, and like it sort of became this legend of what he was. And then they made this movie of it, and people liked the difference in
Mm-hmm.
this and other types of like fighting. And that's
Yeah. But you also have Pam Grier, who is great and has been great in lots of things. But in this, it's again typical of this movie. It's this overcomplicated character where she was a cop, kinda, except now she's going to be a district attorney, but not yet. She has one more week until she's a district attorney, and that's why she has to ride around in Steven Seagal's car and and she gets to be the one who nags him because he's going to get her in trouble a week before she's going to be district attorney. Uh, and again, it's just kind of like, why is it so complicated? um,
that that's the thing with a lot of these early Steven Seagal
uh
movies,
huh.
and obviously a lot of his future ones, is that they're convoluted in the way of just like, how can we get this into a place where he gets to like break people's wrists and like knife fight with them in close
Yeah,
quarters and
yeah.
do it really fast, and the rest of it doesn't really matter. And again, going back to when I was a kid, like I did used to actually enjoy Steven Seagal movies because it you didn't the plot didn't matter, right? Like it was
Mm-hmm.
just about like, oh, this is neat. Like here's this
Yeah.
guy, it's like chill, but then he can like come out of nowhere and just kick your ass and like right there and like super fast. And
Mm-hmm.
I and and then so he goes on, he does several more movies that are essentially exactly like this one. And then his biggest movie, which I've also rewatched, which is not part of this, is Under Siege,
Mm-hmm.
which the funniest anecdote about that was they were concerned that it only had two words in the title because all of his other movies are above the law,
Oh,
marked
okay.
for death. Like they all have three words, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like a thing with him. And
Under the siege,
right,
under
and
a
then
siege.
exactly, but that's the funny part is they were trying to like concoct like what do we call this thing? And I can't remember. There was one that actually had legitimacy to it, and they were like, no, this is supposed to be different. Like they made him cut his ponytail. It's a totally different movie. It was massively successful, and all it ended up doing was like inflating his ego to like this whole other level. And that's why he never made like another successful movie after Under Siege. Like
Under
he ended
siege 2 is okay.
it's okay, but it
Yeah,
wasn't it didn't do what Under Siege did
that's true.
financially.
Yeah.
Like, and that's a lot of the evidence they use in this is like some of the box office stuff because that's the easy way to kind of equate these things. And I know it's
Mm-hmm.
not the only thing, but some of the longevity obviously has to be. But Under Siege 1 is the only one with longevity.
Yeah.
Like if you go onto your streaming service and search Steven Seagal right now, like Under Siege is going to be the first thing that comes
Oh,
up.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely the first movie that comes to mind for me.
Yeah. And then what's they did the weird like Indian one on
Yeah, let's see. I know the one you mean, and oh man, see the problem is if you pull up his thing now, he's actually keeps making a whole bunch of movies that
and
are
they're all direct to video and
yeah,
they're
yeah,
back
yeah,
word titles. Yeah, they're
on deadly ground.
on deadly ground. Yeah. And so
But yeah, I mean, he did like so. Under Siege is 92. On Deadly Ground is 94. Under Siege 2 95. Then he's got Executive Decision and The Glimmer Man both in 96. And
so
that's where it kind of really starts falling apart. I think he has more after that, but those I think that was the that was
yes.
just after the peak.
Right, because Under Siege was the peak, and these other
hmm
ones are
It's
okay.
kind of
Are okay.
are plateauing for a little while before it starts sliding downhill.
Well, and On Deadly Ground is an absolutely bizarre movie. Like I couldn't even bring myself. Like I part of me wanted to rewatch it after like hearing some of the stories about it, but like he directed it.
Mm.
It's 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 a very bizarre movie. And then Under Siege 2 came out, which again was like him having to go back to what was like you can see it in the timeline, right? And then impetus behind Executive Decision was he wanted to do that movie because he got to die in it, and he thought that would make the movie, because the indestructible Steven Seagal who cannot die would die, and that would be
Mm-hmm.
the only story of the movie, and that would be like the ego in like the way that he chooses things is ridiculous.
Oh, right. Like I had forgotten that is the one where he's like in the opening sequence and he's supposed to be the badass, but he gets killed, and that's where Kurt Russell has to pick up the pieces.
Yes. And that's
Yeah.
one of that thing. And all he did was brag about how he was getting $4 million for 4 days work. So he's making $1 million a day.
Nice. Well, that I mean, he's not the only one who said stuff like that. I mean, like Orson Welles classically had a bit like that with the Third Man, where he's basically saying it's the perfect movie. He only has to be in the last half an hour, but everyone has spent the hour before that talking about
Yeah.
him.
Like literally the reverse of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, it is neither here nor there, but the big thought that I had after processing that was the plot of that movie is I like Kurt Russell,
Yes.
but we're not talking about Kurt Russell. Um,
No, I'll say it's funny that we've kind of gotten to this because Above the Law is so ridiculous that
mhm.
it's like hard to even discuss as a movie
Yeah.
on merits, that it's really just about like, hey, this is like the Steven Seagal vehicle that we chose.
Mhm.
I'll kind of say at the end, I think the last chapter, because a lot of times he and yeah, so the last chapter of him and Van Damme, because it contrasts in the two of them,
Mhm.
is called Oil and Water, is the title of the chapter. Not just because they don't get along, but because the way that they like took their careers is so different.
Hmm.
That Van Damme did more of the Schwarzenegger thing, where it's just like, I'm just gonna have fun doing this,
Mhm.
right? Like I'm gonna be silly, I'm gonna enjoy it, I'm gonna like I mean
Yeah.
it's a wonderful life that I get to live, and maybe some of these movies are good, maybe some of them aren't. Like I'm gonna keep trying. And
Mhm.
Steven Seagal like took everything so seriously of like and it was just weird.
Mhm.
And apparently, if you remember Under Siege, the scene where the girl is introduced, where she jumps out of the birthday cake, and she's on the ship because she's the Playboy playmate for the captain's birthday
Mhm.
party. She jumps out of the cake naked, and the sort of contrivance is that she fell asleep and didn't realize all this stuff had happened, and so she thinks this is her cue to like jump out of the cake, and it's like this weird awkward long scene of like her just dancing topless.
Mm.
And
It's
that
been a
is,
while since I saw it, but I remember bits of that at least.
well, as a teenage boy I remember it. But it was apparently like he like put the pressure on to like make that like as long as it was, like as like much of a thing as it was. Like again, some of this may be retroactive memory, but he's obviously a weird enough dude that like people aren't afraid to like pin bad decisions on him, you know.
But yeah, so in case anyone was unclear, this was the one that I think we mutually agreed is like it has some good bits, but mostly it's just sort of a mess. Like, um, I mean, like it's not bad. I didn't not enjoy watching it. I enjoyed watching it, but it is certainly lesser when compared to some of these others, and it's not particularly memorable in its own.
Correct. And that is actually why I chose to watch Under Siege, even though we didn't discuss it
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't part of this, is that I was just like, it was fine, but I had fonder memories. Like I obviously have like my modern day like take on who he is and how he's weird. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that to be colored by just watching this one movie. Like I want to watch the movie that was really
Mm-hmm.
good. And Under Siege is still really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think we
It's good because
picked
of Tommy Lee Jones.
Tommy Lee Jones is good. Gary Busey's in that too, I think.
Tommy Lee Jones and Gary
Yeah.
Busey, and when I kind of came across it, it's the interesting part is that Tommy Lee Jones and Gary Busey, even though they're the bad guys, have more screen time than Steven Seagal does, because he's kind of like, you know,
Yeah, he doesn't talk that much, right? He's
Yeah, and
the
he's
yeah.
sneaking around the ship, and it's all
Mm-hmm.
about like, and but it almost was like more for Zio because they spend the whole movie talking about how much of a badass he is and like why they've got to get him,
Mm-hmm.
which actually works better in a movie than just like jamming it down your throat,
Yeah.
right? And so it's more of an entertaining movie. And then the fun fight scenes are more fun because they're still cool and they're still fast and they're still like, oh, look at what he did. But it's not like the point. It
Mm-hmm.
actually fits into the story as opposed to the story creating the fight scenes, which is
Yeah.
like this. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we picked Above the Law rather than Under Siege was like would have been the obvious one, except it's 92, and we were kind of
Correct.
talking about like 80s.
Oh
And
yeah,
so,
no,
yeah.
it's definitely a transition from this.
Yeah.
Like this is the one to watch for what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'm just like reminding the audience if they didn't
yeah.
remember that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Same
So
reason we're doing Bloodsport after Under Siege or after Above the Law is the same reason I watched Under Siege after Above the
right,
Law.
because
It's like,
in the mood for a better movie.
yes.
All right. Well, so with that said, let's talk about Bloodsport. Bloodsport rules. It's a little heightened and silly, not quite to the level that First Blood Part Two is, but it definitely feels like it's taking place in a slightly different reality than ours, even though it's ostensibly based on a true story. Um, but it's
It,
just fun. It's just
it's
cool.
the same kind of true story as, and maybe I actually got the how the stories got there wrong. I think actually the Frank Duke story is the one that was in the martial arts magazine, and Steven
Oh,
Seagal
okay.
was. But that's again why these movies tie together is they're based
Yeah.
on these like specious true stories
Yeah.
that have background. Like Frank Dukes essentially has been, I think, pretty much shown to have made this whole thing up. But it doesn't matter because it's
Mm-hmm.
fun.
Yeah. We got a martial arts tournament that seems like it must have been, if not the primary, at least a substantial inspiration for the fighting video game genre, like Street Fighter and Mortal
Mortal Kombat.
Kombat, and because you've got well, I guess lots of martial arts movies before Bloodsport have had elaborate, colorful tournaments. So it's not like it invented it, but it feels like this take on it is what
Yeah,
led
right.
directly to those. But so you got all the different weird, people each with their own sort of look and their style, and it's set in like one of the only movies to ever be filmed in actual parts of the Kowloon walled city before it all got torn down. Like that. People don't know about Kowloon walled city. Google that. It's amazing. Um, and Jean Claude Van Damme is they put just enough plot contrivance in there to explain why he's American but talks like that, and and then he's just so obviously having so much fun through most of it, like when he leads the two army guys on the foot chase through the city.
Yeah.
And he's just like obviously teasing them because he's in so much better shape that he has plenty of time to actually just screw around with them while they're trying to chase him down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the sort of smirk that he does this movie with is so much fun,
Mm-hmm.
and we can understand like why this like launched him as a star
Oh
because
yeah.
he's so appealing. Like he's charming, he's funny, he's laughing through the whole thing, he's thoroughly enjoying it. Like you enjoy watching him enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And then he does also these superhuman things,
Yeah,
with
like
the
the splits, man, with his feet on the opposite chairs. It just like well, and like even before that, you see the bit where he's doing his training and he's got the arms and like his legs like in weights where and you just sort of feel like there might be some degree of special effect assisting that, but to a large extent, he had to just have actually done the stuff that we see on screen because, like, it's even if you were going to try to make an effect of it, he still has to do it.
right.
Which is one of the things that when I was reading up on it a little bit, you might have even more on this from the book, but given that the guy who Frank Duke's the real guy whose story ostensibly this is, and who consulted on this movie and went on to consult on other things too. Eventually, these two guys had like a falling out, and there's lawsuits and accusations and stuff like that. But one of the accusations from Dukes was that like he taught Jean-Claude everything and he didn't really have any skill, and that is just so like transparently false, because like you can see him do stuff on screen, right? Like he can't have had no skill because we can see him do stuff. Like
Yeah, and it was his whole thing. Like he owned like this martial arts dojo in Brussels, and like wanted to he had such a elevated level of skill that he felt like this was more bigger than just running a dojo, right? So he and his buddy just up and moved to Los Angeles and like lived in their car. And the way that he would pitch himself to producers is he would meet them outside of fancy dinners and do like the quick kicks like over their head.
mm-hmm.
Like, you need me in your movie. Like you can believe like that, you believe, right? Like that he's silly enough that he would think that that's the way to convince somebody he should be in a movie.
Yeah.
And and he ended up like, yeah, he ended up making friends with Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone, and like through his sheer skill, not his movie making. And he got his break in the movies because his skill led him to people that could get him the break in the movies.
Mm-hmm.
So it's clearly not true, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, like you said, you see in the movie that he has the skills. Like,
Well,
you can't invent that stuff,
yeah,
right?
like, and there's so many just little fun bits of this movie. For one, you've got Donald Gibb, who is probably best known as Ogre from the Revenge of the Nerds movies, but is just the other loud American who becomes, Frank's best friend and fellow competitor, who it feels like there might have been another version of the script where that guy actually dies instead of just going to the hospital, but it's probably more fun for him to live because he gets to be alive at the end. It's happier that way, happier ending.
Yeah. Well, they actually in Kickboxer, which is a very similar type movie that happened
Mm-hmm.
like a year or two later, then that character, not Gibb, he does die
Mm-hmm.
in that movie. So I would agree that that's probably true, because they ended up like making a very almost a mirror movie, just
Mm-hmm.
in a different location with different characters with that plot point. Yeah.
It In this one, it feels like it would have been the obvious move, but kind of a lesser movie for it if it had done that, because it it's one thing to give it like extra stakes, but it deprives us of being able to have the scene in the hospital, where they're worried about him later. And then of course lets the ending be happier when he's okay again. We got him for you, and hey, I'll get you next year. And that whole bit, like that's just fun.
It is
Um,
fun, and they managed to get around it because they just kill a guy who's not as important in the
right.
movie, right?
Yeah.
So somebody gets to die
Oh,
to
sure.
make the stakes go up. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and we definitely establish fully and thoroughly that the bad guy is the bad guy. We don't. He's the bad guy. One of
Polo
the.
Young, by the way, is such a great martial arts movie, 80s martial arts movie villain. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
just so good. Like he's everything that like the Schwarzeneggers and the Stallones, like he's so big and so imposing
Yeah.
and so mean looking. Yeah.
One of the things that's really cool about this movie is how many really huge buff guys there are whose body shapes are very different than what we think of as the Hollywood muscle guy. You know what I mean? Like they
Mhm.
just like they've worked different muscles. Like there's almost like this standardized expectation of a bodybuilder, strong muscle dude looks like this. But then there are people who have really developed their muscles who don't have quite that same profile. It's different proportions. And so
Right.
this movie has lots of different looking strong guys. And I think
Yeah,
that's
because that
cool.
yeah, the standard look like there's a true aesthetic component to it where it's like
Mm-hmm.
if one part isn't meeting the standard, like you actually work that like a weakness, right? Like to
Mm-hmm.
make yourself look a certain, like you craft this body,
Yeah.
whereas these guys' bodies are crafted out of their craft, right? And
Right.
so you
Yeah.
have some guys who are just like really strong, but like they're awkwardly proportioned, like our villain. Like
Mm-hmm.
he has these massive pecs and like arms, but
Yeah.
they're like not, they're in a weird proportion to the rest of his body. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have these guys who are super strong but like very sinewy because they're
Yeah.
they have to be very mobile, right? And
Well,
it's
and then you have that one guy who's just huge, and
yeah,
and he's just like this wall of meat that you just like you just hit him and it just he doesn't even move. And that's of course where we get the nice and fun go down into the splits and punch him in the balls.
put him in the balls, right? Like you got to find his weak spot.
You know, one of the things that I did think about though in watching this movie is how nuanced the line can be between martial arts competition versus like ultimate fighting sort of thing, right? Because one of the things that we definitely see here is everyone's got their style and they're very different from one another and they're all doing their different styles against whoever, right? As opposed to in fighting leagues where people really can do whatever they want, it kind of always just turns into grappling, right?
Right.
Like that's just the thing that actually sort of works under those rules.
Yes. Yeah, this has more interpretation and beauty to it, whereas
Mm-hmm.
in the reality, like the true fighting, like they've narrowed it down to a lowest common denominator of what's most effective,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So I agree with you. This is way more fun.
Yeah. And there's an interesting nuance too where everybody in the audience is cheering for blood. There's big mentions, big tracking of like fastest KO and that sort of thing. But it's when the one guy kills someone, that is immediately treated by everyone, even all of the people who were just screaming for blood a moment ago,
That's crossing the line.
as like, no, that's not cool. We don't like that. And the judges actually get up and turn around and everything. And there was a moment there where I was thinking, like, I don't know if I buy that because like everyone was screaming for blood just a second ago. But what it made me think of is actually how things like NASCAR, because as much as people kind of outside the sport will often assume people want there to be crashes, like they'll say they don't but they kind of secretly do, right? Like because it's thrilling, that sort of thing. And maybe there are people like that, but by and large people who are actual big NASCAR fans have their favorite guys and they don't want them to get hurt and killed in crashes.
Yep.
And so like even if your favorite driver loses the race, you don't want them to lose by crashing a car and somebody getting hurt, right? So like I buy that, like it, as a martial arts competition, it's exciting to see someone be at their best, but especially when this guy clearly, like, presumably everybody is signing waivers that basically say if you die as a result of this fight, nobody's liable, because that doesn't make any sense to do it any other way. I mean, I think real boxing does that too, right? Just because it's possible that could happen. You don't want to criminally charge someone when they voluntarily entered a fight. But the point being, our bad guy here, Chong Li, is that was the bad guy, right?
Yep.
He clearly kills when he didn't have to, right? Like the fight was won, but he takes the extra step. Um, and there's other times where even without killing, he is clearly striking to maim as opposed to just win.
Yeah.
And so after thinking about it a little bit, I realized I do kind of like that nuance that everybody's excited by the fighting, but they don't want it to go too far, and it's not feigned.
No, I mean it's like rules in tackle football,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's okay to tackle these people like this, but when you do this where it could actually injure somebody, that's
Mm-hmm.
too much. We don't like that, and that's bad,
Yeah.
right? Like that's a pretty common thing. Like I think you hit it with the NASCAR example, but it
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
You don't actually want people to get hurt. Well, or it's, like we did talking about Well, I guess so. We did talking about Survivor for a long time, right? And we often talked about how it's obviously dramatic when somebody gets hurt or sick and they have to be medevaced or whatever. But that's not what it's dramatic. But you don't want that to happen. That's not what the game is supposed to be about.
right, the threat of that occurring is where the adrenaline and the enjoyment comes from. Is like,
Yeah.
oh, this is sort of like this contained violence so that I can feel and put that kind of fun part of like my visceral reaction into that
Hmm.
without it actually going too far, you
Yeah.
know.
But yeah, so I like those aspects that feel kind of thoughtful about how it all plays out. I like we got a little young Forrest Whitaker in here as one of the military guys trying to bring him in. Um, Forrest Whitaker's great, right? Like what a great actor. He's just contributed so much to movies over the years.
Yes.
Um, and we've got some fun stuff with Janice, who I think she's probably not the actress specifically, but the character is probably responsible for the parts of the movie that are not the strongest. But there's still some fun stuff that she gets to do. Like the one bit in the movie where it's clearly shot for sex appeal is not of her, it's her watching him when he's in his underwear after they've spent the night together. Like there's clearly a female gaze shot there, and that's the sex appeal shot that the movie does. It really doesn't objectify her that much at all.
Right, it's like they leaned into like, hey, guys are going to watch this movie to watch all the ass kicking,
Mm-hmm.
and if they're going to bring their girlfriends, we got to give them a little bit here,
Yeah.
you know.
But yeah, there's definitely that shot where like he's talking on the phone or something in his underwear, and there's just like his underwear is slipped down just a little bit, so he kind of reaches down to pull it up, almost like the copper tone baby
Yeah.
or whatever, but it's just like that shot is so clearly a look at, hey girls, look at this guy, sort of look, and it's there's just lots of little fun stuff like the chase, and it's not all just the fighting in the tournament. There's also the fun bit where Jackson and Frank are playing the kung fu video game. And it's
Yes.
just like there's lots of fun little grace notes in this movie on top of what you're really there to see, the main event, which is the fighting, which is also good. They make the fights feel different from one another, and the threat is there. And then, by the time we're in the end, and the bad guy cheats by throwing mystery sand into Jean Claude's eyes, where he cannot see at all, but his eyes aren't like red or running or anything. It's fine. But we know, because we saw a whole training montage earlier, that he specifically trained how to fight while blindfolded. So it's just this really satisfying full circle thing, where he, even though the other guy cheats, he still wins. And it's just great. It's classic stuff.
Yeah.
I like this movie.
It, oh yeah, no, I like this movie. I think it definitely like hits all the notes of what we're talking about, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a guy who's, kind of funny, but on his own. He's bigger than life because of like his abilities, and he doesn't need special effects to carry a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I these were all fun, and that's why I said I even went and watched a few more, and I think I told you like if I watched every movie that I wanted to watch after reading the book, like because it
Oh,
talks
sure.
about literally not literally every movie that these guys do, but every one of consequence that like kind of tells the narrative, right, is
Mm-hmm.
in here. and it's like, oh yeah, that was fun. That was, I don't know,
Well,
watch that.
so
Yeah, I
just
figured out.
roll call some of the ones that you especially felt compelled to watch.
So I did watch Terminator. Um, I felt compelled to watch Rumble in the Bronx. I felt compelled to watch for a brief time On Deadly Ground.
Okay.
Um, I felt compelled to watch Universal Soldier.
Hmm.
Uh, to go back and rewatch Rocky 1, 2, 3, and 4 because of like now having this like context of the evolution, which I'd always felt. Like I
Mm-hmm.
always knew Rocky 1 and 2 were one way, 3 was a one way, and 4 was a different way. But to like see it with the additional context,
Mm-hmm.
uh Terminator I did watch.
Yeah, you mentioned Terminator, but yes,
Yeah,
that's a good one.
Terminator 2 I really wanted to go watch again
Mm-hmm.
and haven't yet. True Lies. Uh
So you watched True Lies? Where did you find
no,
it?
I wanted
Oh,
to watch
oh,
Terminator 2. I wanted to watch True Lies.
True
Um,
Lies and The
held
Abyss
compelled.
are two of James Cameron's movies that he is just not interested in making widely available to watch anymore, which is a bummer because I love The Abyss. I mean, True Lies also good, but Abyss Director's Cut in particular is one of my favorites, and it's just like, want to buy it on Blu-ray? Too bad. It's not on Blu-ray.
There's a lot of talk because did he do Die Hard right after The Abyss? I think no, that was McTiernan. What did he do right
Um,
after The Abyss?
I think True Lies was after The Abyss.
True Lies. Yeah. So yeah, there was he kind of
Well, the part of it supposedly what's holding up those two movies coming out like in like a 4K release or something is apparently all that has to happen is for Cameron himself to sign off on the transfer and they'll just have do it, but he's just dragging his feet for reasons of his own. You know, he's a mysterious guy. But that said, it's also
Terminator 2 was what came out after The Abyss.
okay. But so the one of the things that's notable about The Abyss is as much as I love that movie, it was apparently a very contentious filming process, and that much of the cast did not enjoy the process of making that movie and don't want to talk about it. And so James Cameron has thankfully, and he's talked about this in interviews, has chilled out a lot since the
Yes.
time that he made that movie, which is good. But it's also possible that part of why he's dragging his feet on that is that he doesn't enjoy reflecting back on that time.
So Terminator 2, he maintained some of that because there was a lot of talk about that, about like the way he treated like particularly the kid Edward Furlong.
Yeah,
Yeah, and just he, being just kind of a jerk,
yeah.
but a
Very
perfectionist type of jerk.
intense. Yeah,
Yeah,
perfectionist, like has to be done my way, and I'll yell at you if you do it wrong.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, that's right. The Abyss being done prior to Terminator 2, that was why the connection was made because it's actually the effect in the Abyss that does the periscope
Mm-hmm.
is the same technology they used to
Yeah.
make the T1000, like the
Right.
same
Yeah.
concept.
So it was kind of a like a first test, but it was made more elaborate in and Terminator 2, one of the big changes too was like not only just doing more elaborate shapes, but also actually transitioning from the pure effect to real textures and
Yep.
everything. Whereas the water tentacle in the Abyss is only ever the water tentacle. It doesn't ever change texture.
Right.
Um,
And so the thing I was thinking of when I was thinking, because I was thinking about the end of the Abyss, and it was actually another McTiernan kind of like genius thing. At the end of the Predator, they wanted to do the original script, and the producers really wanted him to go find the Predator's ship
mm-hmm,
and like go and see all the alien stuff in there. And McTiernan thought that wasn't the right ending,
mm-hmm.
and so he just threw like reshoots and delays. Like he basically orchestrated a way that like didn't happen
Right. I
because he
see.
didn't want it to happen. And
Well,
he was a first time director in Predator. So he didn't have the clout to just say you can't do this. So he had to like manipulate these things. The Predator one was maybe one of the most fun.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Nice.
outside of Die Hard, which because I wasn't expecting that being in here, but we've talked about
Yeah.
Die Hard enough,
Hmm.
and it's all the
I
reasons
mean,
we love it
great
is
movie,
why
but
it's
we
in
have
here.
talked about it before. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And all the reasons we love it is why it was part of the story, but the key piece being that a more relatable character became the.
Hmm. Well,
And also a weird aside about Die Hard is that it there is some argument to be made that it was what launched like movie uh star salaries
hmm.
because they wanted Bruce Willis. He couldn't do it because of moonlighting. They went to a bunch of other people, and it came down to like, we can't get this made unless we get a star. And like, he is really the guy we want. And his agent was savvy enough that said 5 million, which at that time was unheard of. And they had no other way or they would lose the project. So they paid him 5 million, and then he reset the standard of what everybody's going to get paid from then on.
Hmm.
And so again, it's not the only reason that that happened, but it's like kind of a funny like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Good for
And
Bruce
it was
Willis.
worth it
Hmm.
because I watched Die Hard every year.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too that it kind of ties back into discussions we've had before is we talked about this in context of James Bond versus Ethan Hunt, and with Indiana Jones, of the idea that action stars that make everything look easy versus action stars that make everything look hard, right?
Yes.
Whereas, like in First Blood Part 2, Stallone as Rambo is making everything look easy. But in Die Hard, Bruce Willis is making everything look hard.
Yep. That's the case. And then, sort of the last piece I'll kind of close out, at least my portion of it, is that there was a really great thing about how, like, again, how Die Hard and how some of these things opened the door for like just like a new kind of action hero. Like, you didn't have to be Rambo anymore. You could be Keanu Reeves. You could be you know, Sandra Bullock, who's done some movies. Like, it touched on all the different things. Michelle Yeoh, like, she's given a ton of credit in this book of like, now you found a Asian woman in her 50s to be the action movie star of an Oscar winning movie. Like,
Mm-hmm.
which the funny tie back to that is that those roles used to be reversed, and it was originally offered to Jackie Chan, and he didn't want to do it. And he admits that he doesn't think he could have done it the way that she did it. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
how great that guy is.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, and I mean,
Yeah.
and Michelle Yeoh is great. I mean, back when Everything Everywhere All at Once came out, I was just kind of like so high on her. I went back and watched several of her movies that I hadn't seen in a while, like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and speaking of Jackie Chan, you have Police Story 3, I think is the one with her in it. I'm pretty sure that's
Yes.
yeah, and yeah, she's just great. She's been great for so long. She's just still great. What a great actress she is.
Yeah.
Um,
It was a great closeout to it, to just have him be so deferential to her and say, someone who's his friend, who he respects her talent, to be like, that movie wouldn't have won an Oscar had I done it. And I already have my Oscar, right? Like, she was the person to play that role. And I didn't choose her to do that, but I'm glad I didn't choose to do it. Like, just a good dude. Like, so,
uh, so
so that was fun.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, that was a great topic. I really enjoyed, rewatching the ones I had seen before. I hadn't seen Above the Law, and I enjoyed watching it, even if it was the least of the four that we talked about here. I hadn't seen the Rambo movies. I had a great time with this one. But so
And I had a great time again reading
yeah,
the book. It was just a fun. It's if you like these movies and you like reading context and things like the way that he lays the book out is actually way better than even I pitched it the first time. I really loved the journey that he takes you through. It's very good.
nice. So with that, let's talk about what we're going to do next time. And so I had proposed as a possible theme food movies, and not just movies where food exists or is kind of superficially present, but movies that are kind of
So
uh,
not Ocean's 11 or
right, like yeah, oceans, like movies where people eat is not sufficient for what I'm talking about. I want movies that are kind of not necessarily even about chefs or cooks, although frequently that's going to be the case, but it's not just that. It's movies that recognize and treat seriously the centrality of food in our lives and treat that as like important and meaningful in the way that sharing food and preparing food and serving food for people is an important thing for people, and it has emotion associated with it, and there's drama associated with that, and so that's kind of the concept. And so the there's no shortage of movies that I think would fit that category, so now we just have to decide which ones we actually want to watch.
Okay. So what's your number one selection?
Well, I'm going to choose first, for partly selfish reasons, Babette's Feast,
Yep.
because I just bought the Criterion collection of that and I haven't watched it yet, so it gives me excuse to do that.
Okay. Best Feast. No, it's my draft selection.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm going with Ratatouille.
Okay, nice.
I think it's a phenomenal movie, but also tells this story
Mm-hmm.
about like why this is so important, like why it's so important to him. So
Okay. So, Ratatouille, I think probably pretty well known. Great choice. Not arguing at all. I was just going to say what Babette's Feast is. If people don't know, it's a Danish language film, but it's a really lovely movie about a woman living out kind of in the country who has a lot of like religiously repressed neighbors who have kind of denied themselves all things fancy, because like fancy things are hedonistic and immoral and that sort of thing, but she basically decides to throw them a dinner party to try to like trick them into loosening up a little bit, and it's wonderful. I haven't watched it in a long time though, so I'm excited for that one. So do we want to, how many do we want to do we want to stick with just those two, or we, one more, two more?
I mean, the four has been fine, especially we're trying to establish a theme.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with four,
Okay.
as long as we're just we're reasonable about when we record. Hey, bud.
Sure, sure. So one of the others, so for my second one, then I guess I'm kind of torn between Big Night, which I've seen many times and is a favorite, and it's a wonderful example of this. It was one of the first ones that came to mind um, when it comes to this. Good dogs, dogs on video. That's always nice. Puppies. Um,
You can tell he's
but
tired, bloodhound, and he has these big ears. And when his ears sag, it's because he's too
oh
tired to hold them up. When he has them like up, it's
yeah.
because he's rested. Anyway,
But yeah,
Big Night.
so but the other movie that I'm kind of torn on potentially including is a more recent movie, which is Pig with Nicolas Cage, that I really loved, especially because it was very sort of surprising. Because you watch the trailer, it almost feels like it's going to be a slightly culinary themed John Wick sort of movie, but it's really that's not what it's about, and it kind of is surprising on every level, and ends up being very much about food in kind of the way that I was talking about. But I am having trouble deciding which of those two. Do you want to be the tiebreaker in my own mind for there?
Nope, you're gonna have to make a call.
All right. Well, I will. I will roll a die. So I'm rolling a d20, and if it's 11 or up, it's Pig, and if it's 1 to 10, it's Big Night. That's a 15, so it'll be Pig.
All right. Uh, I am going with, because it's a movie I've been interested in seeing and have not seen. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we got the second dog, the
Yep.
older dog. Hey, big guy.
Yes,
You
have
guys
his
gonna start
turn.
fighting? I'm gonna go with Chef.
Okay, great. With Jon Favreau.
Yes,
I have actually not seen it.
I haven't either. I've been interested in it, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just one of those ones that never makes a thing. So I'm gonna put it on our list.
All right, and then I think I will, as a bonus round that we probably won't necessarily devote a whole segment to, but The Bear, great TV show, very much on theme for this, is probably part of why I thought of the theme. All right, so that's a TV show. If people
Ooh,
don't know that.
well, that, yeah, no, that just gave me a great idea for our next round.
Oh, okay. Well,
we've really been enjoying Suits. So
oh, interesting. Okay.
courtroom dramas could be our next.
Courtroom dramas. Okay, well,
Anyway,
maybe we'll. That's a sneak preview, but so for next time, Babette's Feast, Ratatouille, Pig, and Chef. And so, in the meantime, thanks for listening and/or watching. And until between now and the next episode, watch good movies.
watch good movies or watch movies where America kicks ass.
Yeah, those could also be good movies.
Show them that they can.
Yes. All right. Well, good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.